this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. How many of you guys remember out there those moments in high school, reflecting back, when you found maybe that special someone that you connected with? You connected with them so well that all you wanted to do was spend time with them. It didn't really matter where you spent time with them. It was just being with them and talking. And sometimes, of course, teenage world, talking leads to other things. But that aside, it's still a moment in time that you can never recapture. And there's nothing like it in the world. For most of us that experience that, it's kind of joyful. You get the warm fuzzies when you think about it. But just think for a moment. You're on a road. You're parked. You and a young lady are sitting in your car. And you're chatting. And you notice that there is a car that is pulled up behind you. A car you've never seen before. Dark. You can see a figure behind the wheel. And then suddenly, a man approaches. And the next thing you know, the glass from your window is exploding. And 2 rifle rounds lodge within your body. And your young life begins to slip away. And all you can think about is a young lady in the seat next to you, trying to protect her. But it suddenly becomes fully apparent that you're not going to be able to. Today on Body Bags, I'm proud to say that we're going to talk about a case that has been cold for decades. And finally, because of our friends at Othram Laboratories, there is now a resolution. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, this case came across my desk, and I had to make comment about it today. I wanted all of our friends to really know about it, because it's, I'm not saying that death comes any more softly to those that are of a more mature age. Death is always hard, but there's just something about it when you have people that are in the bloom of youth, I think, that just makes it all the more horrific. Particularly with violent death, there's no way to anticipate it. I mean, I think back even now to my kids. I cannot even begin to fathom the idea that when you tell them as they're walking out the door, now be safe, be safe. I want you to come on back home, and you're never going to see them again.
But you hit me with something right before we started. You mentioned a note in here, and it affects every young man that, if you ever played sports in high school, there are levels of sports where, in this particular case, we've got a young guy here who was, he was a high school athlete of some merit. People knew who he was. We're talking about, this is Shasta County, California, right? I mean, we're up in Sherry Papini world.
Yeah.
And this is in 1984. By the way, it's a week before Christmas, 1984. And there's this high school athlete who has graduated, and he's now in college, but he's 18. Right. And there's a high school basketball tournament going on, isn't there? Isn't that why they're outside? Isn't that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So think about this. You graduate from high school, you're the star. You go off to college, and so you're not the athlete from high school anymore. You're coming back from college, and you're still a young guy. That's such a cool time to be. It
is.
And he died heroically. I'm just going to tell you that. Terry Arndt died heroically, if that's possible. I mean, I think we all hope that in a situation where we are faced with a life and death decision, that we will go above and beyond to protect who we're with.
Yeah.
I hope that's in all of our, character. And Terry, bless his heart, he died a hero.
Yeah, he did. And the way it has been described, and keep in mind, Dave, it's 1984, brother.
Mm-hmm.
You think about how far away we are from that world at this point in time. He was in this car with a lady friend. And listen, I have to tell you, we know that she's young. She's 18 as well. But they have, to this date, never released her name. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But I was going to say intestinal fortitude here. But the idea of being heroic, I don't know that it's necessarily a thing where you have to build up your courage. This is kind of a primal response. Mm-hmm. And maybe this goes to what had been ingrained in him since he was a little kid, that he's there and he's to protect this young lady that he obviously cares about. I don't know about you. I don't want to sit in a car with some young lady that I wouldn't have, that I didn't care about, And here he is. He's going to put himself in the way she actually described it. Is he apparently, Dave, turned, like rotated his body in order to shield her. Mm-hmm. And the understanding is that you got a guy that just walks up to this window, and he apparently is armed not with a handgun, Dave, but a long arm. That's and this odd. Is a guy that really means business. You show up, and it's not just the power of a long arm, but it's the menacing of this thing. It's one thing if you show up with like maybe a pistol, and don't get me wrong, they're terrifying to be around, but that somebody means business when they are not afraid to walk around with a shoulder-fired firearm mm-hmm. that anybody could recognize. Right. That's why they called pistols concealed weapons. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to conceal a rifle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And which is why I'm glad you pointed it out, because in this particular case, we've got the young 18-year-old couple sitting outside in a car talking, in air quotes. And as I'm still amazed at what happened, the reason we know what happened is because of Terrence Arndt turning his body to shield the girl that he's with from danger. Granted, he is shot and killed. And this young woman, I don't know how she had it in her, what she had just experienced, Joe.
Yeah.
She just saw this friend cover her with his body to try to save her, and he gets shot and killed. And then she's left alone with this guy with the long arm, the long gun. And I always think nowadays when we call it sexual assault, we're not being as direct as what actually transpired.
You're right.
And I know that has something to do with platforms and how they demonetize things when you say certain things.
Right.
But sexual assault is so much worse than what it sounds.
Yes, it is. And it comes along with, there's a variety of things that come along with it. Because, let's just take the word assault just by itself. You've got a threatening element to it. You've also got the physical element that is more than, say, the act, if you will. There can be events where people are struck, they're beaten. I always think about somebody with a long arm. Maybe I've seen one too many, World War II movies where people are assaulted with the butt of a weapon. But, just that menacing thing that comes along, or taking the muzzle of the weapon and putting it, against them, telling them, giving them directives, giving them commands of what you will and will not do. And you shall submit to what I tell you to do. And listen, she had evidence at that moment in time that this individual meant business, Dave, because it's not just the fact that this young man sacrificed his life for her, but the showering of the glass as those projectiles pass through it, which, by the way, they turn into tiny little projectiles of their own. They fragment. You have, and if it's fired through a side window, you'll get impact with these bits of glass. The glass actually cubes. I don't know if people know that, but the glass in the side windows, the safety glass will cube, and you'll get these little right angle lacerations on your person. I've seen this happen. It happens in car accidents a lot. Gunfire can initiate these things as well, because suddenly they take on their own independent velocity that's generated as a result of the kinetic energy of this round passing through the glass, shattering it, and driving it forward. So even if it doesn't have a lot of energy, you're being showered in this. And in addition to that, it's also the sound. Dave, can you imagine being locked into the cabin of a motor vehicle and a rifle is fired into the space? Do you realize how disorienting that is? And all of that sound, the powder, the spark, the flame, and you don't realize that there's literally flame coming out of the end of a muzzle. If you slow down a firearm, and particularly at night, you can really appreciate it. The cabin becomes illuminated all of a sudden. Wow. So you've got all of this activity that goes to this assault, if you will, and it's this continued after that, because after this monster kills Terry, he threatens this young woman and forces her to commit acts which, well, let's just say it this way, should never happened in a civilized society. Brother Dave, I'm going to throw out a number to you. Now get ready for this, because I anticipate it. You know, for those you guys that don't know, Dave and I are looking at each other right now in our monitors, and this is how we have our conversations every day. Matter of fact, we get distracted many times because we just want to chat. We'll chat about anything.
Well,
you know,
so we live so close to one another. I mean, talk about this is kind of like texting your wife in the kitchen from the living room saying, "Hey, I need some more mayonnaise on my sandwich." Like, we're that close, but we actually end up doing it this way.
We ought to actually just go sit on each other's porches and do this show. You know what I'm saying?
At any rate, what were you going to hit me with?
I'm going to hit you with a number.
All right.
3 and 4, 34.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that number is significant of in this case?
No.
You ready for this? That's the number of detectives that have worked on this case since it first happened.
Wow.
34, Dave.
Wow.
34. Can you imagine that?
You know
how many hands that has passed through, this case material has passed through over the years.
That is an agency committed to solving an unsolvable case. And to be honest with you, Joe, I was shocked that it went cold, because you're talking about December 18, 1984. Granted, that is a long time ago.
It is.
But it's not from that time. It's not like it was in the black and white television golden era of TV. I mean, we were a pretty sophisticated society in 1984, and I don't anticipate a case like this that happens in an area that has people. Again, there was a basketball tournament going on. There was a lot of people in the area. It wasn't isolated. There are a lot of reasons to actually have this solved, and I think that might have played into the reason it did pass through 34 different detectives giving it their best shot, because this is a crime that should never go unsolved. And I do think that it's important to point out that while we talked about Terry Arndt, the high school star athlete who is now in college and comes back and he's sitting in his car while a basketball tournament's going on, talking to another 18-year-old, a girl. And when this killing, the murder happens, but after this monster has committed these heinous acts on this woman, Joe, she thought she was dead.
Yeah.
The suspect, the monster, thought she was dead. nothing else for me to do except slink off into the night with the rest of the monsters, which is what he did.
But guess what? I understand from a perspective of privacy and propriety and everything. I really wish I knew her name just so that I could and could see her and look her in her eye and just tell her. You talked about being heroic.
Wow,
Dave. She got behind the wheel of Terry's vehicle with him in the vehicle and drove to get him to a hospital. Now, she has already been assaulted violently at this point in time. She drove Terry to a hospital where they took him from the vehicle. I'm assuming she probably drove up to the ER ambulance ramp.
Actually, Joe, she actually, did not know how to drive the vehicle that he had. And she had to find a cop. She had to find somebody. And that's what she found. She actually found an on-duty cop.
Holy smokes.
And was able to reach them and say, hey, this is what happened. Help me. And that's how they got him. But that's I think that goes back to the heart and soul of why the police were so committed, because they weren't there when it happened. They were there in the minutes after, when they saw the horror of what had happened to an 18-year-old girl. And I think that's why, because she found them and said, this just happened. The guy's still in town. He's got to be around here.
He's got to be around. And there's not, I know that this is not necessarily, I'm not saying they got to pipe sunshine into this area.
Yeah.
However, I've been to Shasta County, California, arguably, in my opinion, at least, by the way I measure things in California, it's probably one of the more beautiful areas. It's way, 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 way up north. It's up toward Oregon. Beautiful scenery. Let me tell you something. If you have never beheld Mount Shasta in person, it is something to see. Oh my Lord. Beautiful area up there. But she was able to get him into the hands of somebody that could render aid. And unfortunately, Terry died. He died. But he did not die in that vehicle. Now, he may have been on the verge of death, but she got him to some location where they could put hands on him and try to treat him. And of course, he gave up the ghost at that point in time. But you know what? I'm fascinated by this dynamic of having the police be involved in this. Now, I can tell you this: they would not have had a tremendous amount of manpower back then. It would have been back in those days. This particular area of the state, I would say, was at least a third less populated than it currently is. I would imagine. You didn't have as many people fleeing to that area from, the lower areas of California to get up there and get away. And so I would imagine that they kind of had a shortage. So even if you put out a BOLO on this case, it would be difficult. But the first thing you have to do is, if she's communicative, and you'd be surprised, well, you probably wouldn't be surprised, Dave, but there's so many of these assault victims that when you go to speak to them, they're almost shocky when you talk to them. They cannot converse with you. But Dave, in this particular case, she gave a descriptor of this perpetrator, and they actually rendered a sketch of this guy. And you know what? That sketch, as it turns out, years later, was pretty close in appearance to who this turns out to be that actually perpetrated this crime. I know that I'm giving a bit away here, but I think that it's really important to understand what she accomplished here. The other thing too, and this is kind of a real tragic thing that has to occur, and it's horrible and painful and all those sorts of things. With her, they would have had to have done a rather detailed examination. If you understand what I'm saying, there would have been
violation
kits done,
the second time.
Yeah. And so it kind of is. But here she is, her face set like flint. She's determined, I think, at this point in time that she wants this guy caught. All right. So in this examination, they did, in fact, collect biological evidence. But unfortunately, 1984 is actually the year that DNA was first utilized, or it was proposed that DNA could be utilized as a methodology of solving criminal cases in England.
Right.
That's how far back this goes. And the guy that actually did that, he winds up winning. I think he won a Nobel Prize.
Oh wow!
And so that goes back so very far. So you didn't have the utility at that point in time. The best you could do is to do a kit and take any kind of biological evidence that you might have. If you're praying that the individual might be a secretor, where if you have seminal fluid, perhaps that they've got identifiable red blood cells, in either saliva or semen that they've left behind. You can get a blood type, perhaps, because at this point in time, CODIS didn't exist at this point in time. Everybody talks about, CODIS this, CODIS that, but even back then, CODIS was, brother, it was not a thing, man.
Right. And that's where, you're talking about the population size. Okay. I looked it up because I started getting really curious. In Bernie, California, where this happened, in the county of Shasta, about 3,100 people in Bernie. Yeah. So I think that is why, again, they made mention of the man was unknown. The suspect is an unknown person, because in a town that small, well, most people, they grow up together, they go to school together, they know one another or have an idea. It's your cousin or so-and-so's brother. You have an idea. But in this case, as they ran down the list, even getting the description from the victim, still didn't have an idea of who it was at the time.
Yeah, and that's quite terrifying. I can only imagine, because, Bernie is not someplace I would think, at least, Dave, that you wind up by accident. You have to intentionally be headed that way, to be domiciled there. You might work in, say, the timber industry or something like this. One of my most vivid memories of being up in that county, it was actually during the wintertime. I went into a restaurant in Mount Shasta, and I may have related this story to you. And I walked in, and there was snowpack on the ground all around this one restaurant. I've been driving down I think it was 5 from Oregon, and walked into the restaurant. And Dave, I walked in there, and they had these gigantic plates of pancakes that were massive. And everybody, dig this, everybody that was in there was a lumberjack. They all looked like that. They had the suspenders on, the big heavy boots, the big beards, and so that's the type of world that this was back during that period of time. Do you actually think that cases like this happen in that location on a regular basis? I can only imagine it was like getting hit between the eyes with a 2x4 for the residents up there. Wow. And what a horrible thing. This kid, Terry, was known, man. Right. Because when you're in a small town, it's the old Miranda Lambert song. I think that in a small town, everybody knows your name. You're the cock of the walk. He's gone off to college. He's playing ball now. You can only imagine how much this impacted that little community up there that knew Terry and probably know this young lady. And the biggest question is, how do you find out who this is? Well, unfortunately, for that little community, that answer wouldn't come for another 40 years. I'll make a little comment about myself here. I've got serious trust issues, Dave. And let me give you an example. When people show up to court with a tank of oxygen and they're in a wheelchair and they've been accused of a horrible crime, I have questions. Now, I know some of you out there, Morgan, you're being mighty judgy. No, I've seen a thing or two. Okay. And we'll get to that in just a moment, but I just want to frame this out from Jump Street here, that when I see an individual present this way, I think that it's an attempt on somebody's part to try to beg for mercy in a case where they showed no mercy, Dave. But I got to tell you, through technology finally caught up with this huge mystery out of Bernie that occurred all those years ago, which for me it's very, very satisfying. I think, like a lot of these cases that we cover nowadays, there's a certain level of satisfaction where you don't think that anything will ever come of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it does, because I got to tell you remember I talked about the samples that were taken from this young woman. Well, Dave, years later, we talked about the 34 investigators involved in this case. Years later, they did take those samples and put them into CODIS, and guess what? They didn't get a hit.
Well, there you go.
they didn't get a hit at that point in time. So at that point in time, technology still had not caught up. But here we are today, and we finally got answers, don't we?
You were talking about how you don't trust people when they show up in court, oxygen mask and all that.
Yeah.
I was reminded of an episode. I was reading this great piece of work about the guy that played Colonel Potter on MASH. Replaced McLean Stevenson. Yeah, Harry Morgan.
Harry Morgan, yeah.
And he replaced McLean Stevenson when McLean left to do movies and ended up doing Hello, Larry for 3 episodes, and that was it. All right. So Potter comes in, and all of a sudden, people kind of forget who was there before Potter. Anyway, Harry Morgan had been an actor in movies, TV for years, even at that point. Well, he was in an episode of The Partridge Family where the Partridge Family bus hit his bumper on his car. And all of a sudden, when he found out they were musicians, all of a sudden he had a neck back problem and everything else. And he shows up in court with a neck thing on, and somebody drops a briefcase, and whoop, there he turns, and it's busted. Great episode. Yeah. So I think the same thing when I see somebody in court that is really dogging it, especially if you're trying to, you're accused of a heinous crime that you've gotten away with for a long time. In this particular case, buddy, we're talking about from 1984 until now. We've talked about how long ago that was. Well, think about it for just a minute. This crime took place in December 1984, 1 week before Christmas. And here we are, weeks away from Christmas, 2025.
Yeah.
And finally, because of great police work, not giving up, I'm going to give them the credit, because they could have walked away from this and buried it, just left it alone. Been easy to do, but they didn't. And every time we do an episode like this, I've told you about the math and the genetic genealogy and all of the work that goes in. We do an episode in 40 minutes on what happened, but it takes weeks, months, and years from the beginning of the process until they actually can identify somebody. Because if it was easy, everybody would do it and we wouldn't have these episodes. But it's not easy. It takes time. Well, finally, in 2025, this year, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office actually submitted some forensic evidence to Othram in the Woodlands, Texas, to determine if advanced DNA testing could help them identify a suspect. Not giving up, Joe.
No.
Not giving up. And what happened?
Well, what happened is that they actually developed a hit on a fellow who, as it turns out, was living down in Tucson, Arizona. The road kind of led to him. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy that lived in that area. They began to dig into his background, and guess what, Dave?
What?
He apparently had no substantive priors at all.
What?
He was not on anybody's radar.
He was a one-off?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that that in and of itself, you go back to CODIS, right? Because this kind of burrows a hole into the whole line of thinking about offenders like this. How many times have you and I both heard somebody say they will offend again?
Yeah.
Okay. That this is not their, how many cliche television shows have you seen? This isn't their first time.
They don't start with murder. They end with murder. Yeah.
And I don't necessarily, we've had a couple of these other cases where the individual would offend one time and then they just drop off the map. They don't pop up anywhere else. They don't have any bad acts after that. And then all of a sudden this guy pops up on the radar. We're talking, well, now when they put the bracelets on him, it's 41 years downrange. You think he thought that he got away with it?
Yeah.
Well, now he's living down in Tucson, Arizona. And as it turns out, Dave, this guy during that period of time, remember we talked about how small Bernie was.
Yeah.
Apparently back in 1984, he was domiciled up there. He had actually lived in that area.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. They were able to go back and do this investigation and look into this guy and determine that he had, in fact, been up there during this period of time. But for whatever reason, like you said, Dave, you never know where these intersections are going to, wind up touching one another, these little timelines and whatnot. I really wonder, looking back or thinking back, I really wonder how close they were at one point in time to maybe putting their hand on this guy and he just kind of slipped beneath the waves.
They actually did make an arrest. Not on him, but back in the day.
Dig this, man. This is the mind-blowing part. Dave, they actually hooked somebody up on this case and incarcerated them for 2 years, man. And it turns out they had nothing to do with the case. That person actually wound up, I don't know if it was a suit or if they just thought, we better make this thing go away. That individual was paid like approximately $350,000 for 2 years of their life.
Wow.
Because that comes down to false imprisonment, man. And they had nothing of substance to hang on that individual. Can you imagine how deflating? We talked about the 34 investigators. Imagine how deflating that would be. Because you've had this case for so long and all of a sudden you think you got somebody. You think this long road is going to come to an end. You hook them up on charges. They wind up getting incarcerated. And now it turns out, no, this is not them. This is not them at all. And you got to pay through the nose for this. But as it turns out, they do wind up being able to hook somebody up, man.
They're going to feel bad putting the wrong guy in jail. I mean, that's at least I hope, they had some conscience about it. But I have heard oftentimes that, well, he got away with, maybe he didn't do this one, but he did something else. Going back, it's like the same thing of nobody does a murder and nothing else. It doesn't happen like that, except in this particular case, it looks like that may have actually been the case. Now, he was 23 years old at the time the murder took place. So he's 5 years older than his victims. That's why they wouldn't know who he was. That's a big enough difference. That's
true. Oh, exactly. I mean, look, I knew people that were older than me when I was 18 years old, but they were not people I would have been hanging out with. And those people surely would not have been hanging out with me.
No.
And so you think, it stands to reason that the witness, who is this poor young woman who's been assaulted, she's not going to know him, but she gives this descriptor, this physical descriptor, which they're able to render, a likeness of back then. And as it turns out, the police are saying that it actually turned out that it looked very, very similar to this guy whose name is actually Roger Neil Schmidt. And they've hooked him up. Dave, I can happily say that he rolled over on this and admitted to it. They still have sentencing that is actually going to take place in just a couple of days from now as we're laying this down. I think December 16th, they're actually going to do the sentencing. And that brings me back, when the images of this guy literally rolling into the courtroom and he's got a nasal cannula in, that supplies the oxygen.
Wait a minute. Nasal cannula? What is that?
Nasal. It's the rubber hose.
Okay, thank
that
you
have to lap.
That
lap
was
over
what
your
it was
ears,
called, but now I
sticks
do.
it into your nostrils.
I will use that in the future.
You have my permission. And he's uptaking oxygen here,
Right.
and I'm sure he's got labored breathing and all this sort of thing.
He's fat, that.
Oh yeah, and he's sitting there and he's in the wheelchair.
Yeah.
Please show mercy to me.
Right. Now he did.
Go ahead.
He did plead guilty. Okay. He did. You mentioned he rolled over on himself. He did take a plea, which means,
what a nice man, right?
But they had him dead to rights. He didn't pick up the phone and call the department and say, "Hey, I've had something on my mind now for 40 years, it's eating me up. My conscience has got me." He didn't do that. They already had him. They had the DNA. They did all the, they probably camped out. They probably got stuff out of his trash. They had him hooked up when they talked to him.
Listen, I do know this. The police up in Shasta County, they actually coordinated with Tucson City PD to say, look, this is what we're looking at, man.
Yeah.
We need your help on this because this guy's got to be hooked up.
Right.
He's got to be hooked up. So, they sat on his house for a while, just checking him out, seeing his comings and goings.
Right.
And when you have this definitive data that has been generated by Othram, and you can look at it and you see these numbers, I can only imagine for those investigators that began working this case back in 1984,
wow.
They would have been salivating over this kind of factual scientific data that they could look at and say, oh, this is our man right here. They didn't have the ability, and I would urge everybody here, all of our friends out there that hear us talking about these cases, do not judge these investigators harshly from back in the day. And I know that you guys probably understand this, but you can only do what you can do, and many times you are, in fact, limited by the technology that you have. Just as, generations before that generation in 1984, you go back to the 40s, they were very much limited on the things that they could do, for instance. So every generation, moving forward is going to have more technology that's going to assist them. But there is no better example of this than what we see today from our friends down in the Woodlands.
I love
Woodlands, Texas.
I was going to tell you one thing, Joe.
Yeah, sure.
That you mentioned December 16th, that's the date for sentencing. Well, they've already negotiated it. It based on the crime and when it occurred, it was a death penalty case. He could have faced the needle, but the negotiation at his age and everything else, they have agreed to a life sentence without the possibility of parole and waiving all rights to appeal. So that's what they're going to sign off on December 16th, on almost the 41st anniversary of the murders.
Something? Yeah. All these decades later. Oh, by the way, I think that in 1984, still in California, my friends out there would need to correct me about this, but I think in 1984 in California, it was still the gas chamber back then.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Cyanide gas, man. You imagine? And so, he dodged this. But unlike Terry, who did not dodge those projectiles that burst that window and shattered him in glass and launched those projectiles into his body that he used to shield his young friend with. Maybe there is justice in this old world. I don't know. I don't know how we come to it, but at least this guy's off the streets. Not that he could necessarily harm anybody any longer, but it does send a message out. It sends a message out that for those that are thinking about doing horrible things, technology's on your heels now, wherever you are. I hope that if you have done something like this, that you're at home sweating right now. You're thinking, all those things I did in secret, in the dark, that terror that I subjected people to, there's a reckoning coming. There will be a lot more reckonings coming relative to the scientific data that has been collected. And a big thanks out to our friends at Othram. And listen, many of you guys say, I want to participate. I want to try to help. I want to be part of the solution to all of these cases out there. Well, it requires funds. And Othram doesn't ask for a lot. visit their website, DNAsolves.com. Check out the cases. You can actually reference them geographically. If there's something in your particular area that, kind of drives you, that you think that you would like to put a few bucks behind, do it, man. Do it. I think that it is one of the ultimate gifts that you could provide society with. I think, and specifically these families who have no answers whatsoever. And it doesn't have to be a homicide. It can just be an unidentified body that turned up. You never know. You might have known the person in your community that went unidentified, and suddenly they find a skeleton. You never know. So that's DNAsolves.com. That's our friends at Othram Laboratories in the Woodlands, Texas. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.